right, so we are at Think Movement, a group call here. We have Rufus and Kyle. The topic today is pelvic dysfunction, including the genital region from a male perspective. We have Kyle here, who I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Kyle. I was a trainer for about 10 years in the Seattle area, and now I live in Alaska. Still working in the movement world, but more with kids now, a little bit more hands-on of the individual kind of rehab setting. So,
okay,
short.
Rufus?
Hi, yeah, I'm Rufus. Currently, I'm in Deer Isle, Stonington. Have been on a fishing boat for the past 3 years, and that's the primary, like the work of fishing, and those movement patterns have been the primary lens that I've been seeing movement through for the past couple of years. But putting that in context of other work that I've done, construction, etc., as well as performance, dance-based movement.
Cool. So why we thought having a male perspective is important, because number one, males generally don't talk about, like females have the pregnancy and all that topic and all that attention, but males, because number one, they have testicles, and number two, thinking about the pelvic floor, everyone kind of thinks about the pee hole, but there's the secondary hole, which is the anus, that again, people don't put that much attention on, probably especially in the male realm, with all of the kind of taboo or identity issues or etc., or can't talk about it. So I just want to kind of start off, and actually before we start off with your stories, maybe I'll throw it back to you as far as saying, as you both try to figure out things, did you find it was hard to access information? Did you find that in general, males talking about this region is not something people want to discuss, and that you just had to figure it out on your own? And if I start with Kyle on that.
Yeah, I would say that's mostly true. I've always been fortunate to be around a fair amount of open-minded people in that regard, so I don't never felt as taboo, but definitely when I worked with clients, especially males in their 50s and 60s, it was very apparent for areas that they weren't comfortable sort of talking about or thinking about, or, you know, it's sort of a numb, dead area, I guess. Like you mentioned earlier, the belly button and the anus, like that whole area it's just sort of like some sort of amnesia there, you know, hip rotation and pelvic tilt and all that kind of stuff. I think it's all related. So the long story short, I think that the start of my information was really in like training and breathing patterns and things like that, and trying to relax that area, because that's the primary cue, a lot of meditation practice. And so that was sort of the kickoff for me anyway.
Cool. Rufus, your kind of experience in finding and talking with people about this?
Yeah, I mean, a range. I think when I described it to you, there was a catalytic event in the first season of fishing towards the end where I took a fall and I landed on my left ischial tuberosity pretty hard, and started trying to address that, as it was not, the pain from that was not really going away, and it sort of radiated down my left leg and then into my right testicle some. And I started looking for resources based on a book that an old yoga teacher had recommended, R. Lewis Schultz's The Male Pelvis Out in the Open, but was found myself kind of disappointed in it, but sort of described that same pattern that Kyle was just talking about. And then in searching for professional help with it, PTs found that the closest PT that would do anything with a male pelvis was in Baltimore, relative to me. So yeah, it's been on my own, and it was really, I don't know, through the conversation with Zeynep recently, starting to focus more on the breathing pattern pieces, and the suggestion to intervene less, that has been sort of most impactful. And I think similar to the before the call started, you were talking about the pole pole dancer, pole athlete that was talking about her experience with pregnancy. And similarly, I think that fall was the inroad. But in retrospect, I think the process of sort of figuring out that connection to other orthopedic movement, and yeah, has been a back and forth of, like, I think probably learning some of that a long time ago could have been very helpful.
And other than this one PT that you found
Yeah.
that would work with the male, have you found much success in trying to talk with anybody about this stuff?
Not really. Zainab was very helpful and sort of the most open, but in terms of approaching other practitioners, it tended to put you in a weird spot where there was, at least locally, in terms of what are you really looking for here? And so yeah, it's been a very solo research project, I guess.
Got it. Okay, so if we kind of take that kind of wide lens and then we bring it a little bit closer to yourselves and your own personal anecdotal stories. So if Kyle, you want to kind of notice, or if you want to recount what you noticed about yourself, what worked, and the after effects of manipulations there.
Okay. So I think it'd be helpful to trace it back, like, all the way to the beginning. I think that most of my development was done the inverted breathing pattern. So when I was born, I would do this thing where I would take a huge chest breath and hold it, basically almost pass out. And that somehow, kept going until, I don't know when I started to really realize it, maybe early 20s, when it took me that long. And so there are a lot of negative repercussions to an inverted breathing pattern over the long term, from postural stuff to wacky CO2 levels, and all sorts of other things. And so the first time I started to correct that was when I started doing sort of a breathing practice or a meditation practice, and that had a super profound impact on the awareness of my, I guess, abdominal region. Even including noticing sort of, I guess you'd call it like an anal retentiveness, like you're just puckered to holy hell all the time. And so any new movement or strenuous movement would increase strain in the area, and therefore also increase tension in the hip capsules. And so last, I don't know, 6-7 years, it's been a slow recorrection, a combination of pivot breathing practices and just a lot of traditional stretching, releasing of areas that had been chronically tight. And combined with, I guess, the pelvic thing is interesting because I ended up, one of my cues that I would use consistently, it's a little bit goofy, but it's just relax your taint. Basically, like, relax that area, because what you notice with a lot of people, especially men, I think it has a lot to do with productive awareness and everything, but like men, the first thing that they do is usually that they'll clench that area, and then it immobilizes the pelvis, essentially, right? So if you're trying to get any sort of movement in that area or hip rotation, I think that you have to first restructure the diaphragm awareness and also talk about how to relax that pelvic floor area as you start to do new movements. Because even something as simple as this, like engaging your glutes, if that system is tangled up, you're not best there, because you're not going to be able to activate the muscle without clenching the pelvic floor. So they're working against each other all the time.
Right.
And so that's sort of been my process, and that has helped to alleviate the ilioinguinal nerve had testicle referral pain, because it was due, most part, I believe, to a lot of anterior pelvic tilt and then improper loading of the hip joints. So that's sort of my theory. Been working.
And so you're still working on that in general as far as that inguinal issue?
You know, I don't look at it that way so much anymore. I just look at it as improving hip rotation for the most part, and just filling up the capsule a little bit is how I look at it now. And I would say now the work's not done, but I would say now I have access to the protocols that would look a little bit more standard PT type movements, you know, or standard corrective exercises. Those actually work now, whereas before they didn't work. So,
and part of a big piece of that was being able to that access was being able to relax and release the pelvic floor area.
I'd say it's huge, maybe the biggest thing that I've done, because you know, you can like know all of the exercises and you can, you know, see all these systems that work just fine, but if you can't properly access the patterns in your nervous system, it doesn't really matter. And I think that the pelvic floor has a lot to do with that. And you know, the diaphragm, pelvic floor, it's sort of, you're talking about the same system,
right? And that leads really well into kind of your findings, Rufus, about looking at the area of the anus and how manipulations there really opened up your hips, except can you kind of talk about
so yeah, well, I had the fall and had some pretty bad bruising, and was working with a PT at the time, but it was like, nope, like there's sort of an imaginary line around the belly button and down to sort of the mid thigh that was like, all right, we're not doing anything there. So it was on my own, and I found some protocols online for like penetrative trigger point therapy that seemed to work fairly well. And yeah, but similarly, as I've continued, the breath work and integrating that into the workday has been sort of more impactful overall. Certainly the like touch-based effort at building awareness, and similarly figuring out that actually like relaxation rather than strengthening, like so much that you'll find about pelvic floor is talking about how to strengthen and learn to contract it. But I think I've been learning that in not only the pelvic floor, but in like whole body system, just how much more range of relaxation there is available often, and how useful breath is. And it's really like, it's been in some stupid ways, it's been a hard, it felt like I don't know, it's one of those things that like I have been listening to people tell me, oh yeah, you need to think about this, you need to think about this, you need to think about this, and it's like, yeah, it sounds really simple, I should probably do a better, cooler stretch. And it's not always true. So at this point, it like continues, I guess, similarly to be an investigation. But yeah, I've been asking lots of questions about testicles generally, and like what sort of orthopedic, not function, but like how, I don't know how to articulate it so well. I mean, one observation was I could not find a single pair of any kind of underwear that was at all comfortable for me in the workspace. And I got rid of it entirely. And the lack of compression around the pelvic floor, I started to see a translation and sort of better hip function generally, and was like, what's that about? It seems too minor to be impactful. But I don't know if it's true for everybody, but for me specifically, I feel like the skin system is super, super sensitive to any kind of compression. And the more that I've gotten rid of it throughout the body, whether it's like cuffs at the wrist or socks that are too tight or shoes that are too tight, or, a waistband that's in the wrong place, all of those things that were causing me problems, like feeling I felt after the fall, I felt sort of a constant pull, like upward pull on my right testicle that was just annoying and frustrating. And now it's gone. It's like, okay, cool. I don't know what of the interventions worked, but certainly, yeah. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit.
No.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add, Kyle?
Oh, I've experienced a similar thing whenever I wear, especially pants that are fitted, just like a pair of jeans or something. I do notice a reversion, sort of like feel things flipping backwards. I think it has a huge to do, especially depending on your hip structure and the size of your legs and things like that. Like, I think clothes we wear can be, very, very detrimental. And I think that's one thing. Just looking at the client side of things, when you're working with somebody who's worn traditional clothing, office clothing, or even just a thick pair of Carhartt, like that has a restrictive effect on that region, and it's very difficult to regain. And then there's all sorts of other theories we could go into just about the cultural, body shame and lack of fitness in that area, but try to keep it on the more clinical path here.
Yeah, and I mean, I certainly think it's all connected, because again, for people who are having an issue and are looking for help, and I don't even know how you found that anal penetration, like, I don't PDF or whatever it is that you found, Rufus. Like, how does one find it when it is so like it's not this dirty thing? And I we're talking about compression, and I feel like, especially for men, there's this counter push. When you look at pro athletes, it seems like all they are is wrapping themselves up in spandex in every single part, right? So, and I'm not a male, but if I'm a male, I'm like, oh, if that's what the best are doing, then I must need more compression, right? And then there's the flip side of safety and compression, right? What is the right amount of hug, of function against, for someone to feel safe? And if you're too compressed, if you don't know what safety is, and then you bring on the layer of taboo talk, it almost seems like it's a lost cause. And no wonder people just like shrug and be like, this is the way it is, or my body's weird, or I'm the only one. Like, of course people are going to feel that way.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, it's similarly like trying to find that balance between I do feel like as I've continued this investigation, I do feel like I'm on the edge of some of these questions. Like, I'm not finding a lot of resources, written or otherwise, that have been super satisfying. And so it's like, okay, that is the space where I want to have open inquiry, sort of like, how are people approaching this on their own? Like, one funny part of the work too that I've noticed, the fishing specific work, or at least how my body is relative to the height of the rail and where the traps sit, etc., is there's a lot of pelvic contact generally in the day-to-day. Like, the protuberances of the hips are coming into contact with the box. Pelvic bone is like right in relationship to when you're lifting a trap. So there's a lot of like hard impact going on in a way that, again, in the sports context, right? Like, from, I think it was probably maybe like last year of T-ball or Little League or whatever, that they make you start wearing a cup, and like it's sort of like, this is just the normative practice, is to believe that you need to have a jock strap, or you need to have something like support is very important, and
like,
not really.
Yeah, this idea of like, protect, don't let things touch. And I think of, from a female PE teacher, how many times the manliest kid in class got a ball or something to the groin area and is just down, and like, and from what I hear, it's the worst thing possible. And so to know, like, as a female, to be like take your time, like, I don't know, like, are they milking it, are they not, like I have no idea what it feels like. So again, it's like another region that only guys can relate to, perhaps. And again, how to let it be, how to normalize all of this stuff, I think is really tricky because, I mean, other than this little forum here where we have two open-minded
Right.
people who are talking about this stuff, how do you? And,
Right.
and how do you start those conversations? I mean, how you're shaking your head kind of.
I mean, it's multi-layered to the point of being, you know, the person has to be profoundly interested, you know, in order to receive the information, because it can also be very invasive
Yep.
for people. So you can't, it's not something you can really force on people, or, you know,
Right.
if they're asking the questions, that's you know, that's great.
Yep.
But
Yep.
what's going on, you know?
Yeah, I find myself, and again, I'm not a professional, but when I'm having like friends complain about similar or ish things, it's like, it's back to the pants question sometimes of like, have you considered your what you wear as a possible factor? Like, in terms of like, I'm noticing that you're tightening your belt right through your buttocks generally. Like, how does that feel when you squat down? But like leaning on the question rather than like diagnosing from a distance, I think. Because yeah, I don't know. It's and like getting the sort of negative feedback of like, why are you asking or interested in this, like leads you to be like, okay, I'll just think about this on my own and like deal with this on my own. And that's, I don't know, I've thought about it too in relationship to what you were just talking about, Chris, with the PE position relative to, I don't know how your PE world works, but here in Maine they've folded a lot of like health class stuff into physical education generally, so it all falls under the same purview. And that's interesting to me too, that like, what is where, because it's not necessarily like people aren't necessarily getting access to this kind of information or inquiry from family, aren't necessarily getting it from school, and aren't necessarily getting it from themselves, but it does feel like a very potent something. Like there's a lot bound up in it. I think at least most men that I know have some serious identity bound up in their pelvis generally. So it's like I don't want to push the shaming conversation too much, but it's also present. So yeah.
Oh, you look like you were going to add something.
Oh, you know, I think that there's a lot of I guess sexual trauma that's related to the issue. It's, you know, it's not overt, you know, trauma experience, maybe sort of ingrained insecurity or sort of protectiveness or aggressiveness about that, and those topics that you see kind of influencing how people react to the question, to the topic itself. And so I think maybe the first step is to just look at your relationship with that part of your life and how that's affecting your movement.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are sort of rifted from being I guess maybe complete or like open enough to accept that working on that area is going to have an impact, you know, on certain physical outcomes.
Right. And even that concept that it could be worked on, right?
Yeah.
You know, even if you have that belief, like if you have that like maybe, which is like the first lever into investigating,
right.
If it dies with not being able to find or know, I mean, I wish that the world was a bunch of these like self-investigators that were like confident enough to utilize themselves as the n=1 to be the one that means most to them, especially on such a personal issue. But I feel like unless there is, you know, a Googleable resource other than that maybe is going to die out into it's not that important, just because of the energy and effort that needs to go into looking into it. And it's all an efficiency thing. And it's funny when you mentioned like health and PE, like 5 or so years removed from the health classroom and all in PE because we keep them separate. But I think about sex ed and how sex ed is so fragmented by the perception of the teacher in the class. I mean, I went to a school with a super Catholic guy, and we have a highly Hispanic population, and he was like, abstinence. And I was like, abstinence? I'm like, we have a student child learning center for kids. So abstinence is not working, right? Like, and I guess that's the weird thing about like structures and systems. So to recognize, all right, a lot of our students are getting pregnant. So instead of like looking at why that's happening, to instead build a childcare center so that, you know, they could still go to school and we could still, it's a very interesting thing. And I remember when I talked about guy parts, girl parts, and all that, and even to get into the idea of like gay sex, that was all, the kids were like super interested in it, because it was something that nobody was talking about from a like student teacher level. It was only stuff they like secretly found on YouTube or whatever. But to open up the dialogue, but again, this is in a classroom setting of, you know, hormonal teenagers, that's on their mind now. And even in the same building, there was a group of kids in health who were getting a very different perspective on what it is from this group of kids in this classroom. And again, the teacher's not wanting, like you were saying, I don't want to talk to you about this stuff if you're not willing to receive it, right? There's no need to start an argument. So this idea that in the same building, sets of kids are getting very different, what is okay, what is not okay, what can I ask, what can I learn, right, from this institution of learning is concerning a bit. But I know if it happened in my building, it's happening in a lot of buildings. And then, right, then I think of what about Catholic or religious schools? Like, can they talk about it at all? It just kind of dominoes, it seems. So I mean, I think like anything that is kind of in the shadows, finding a way to bring it into light is key. And it's we can do it on a one-on-one basis, which I guess is okay. But how do we maybe start tipping it?
I mean, I would probably, and this is beyond my scope of practice, but I think that there needs to be several studies done on anxiety, trauma, and pelvic floor dysfunction. I think that's a very reasonable place to start. There's enough potential, you know, participants of those studies who are going to do things like that, and you know, there's a lot of work you can do in that area. I think to make it clinical, because I think the issue is that it's largely relegated to sort of a scientific, you know, kind of, not fully, but like the literature is not strong enough for a standard practitioner to really take it seriously. You know, like a lot of things in the, you know, yoga, Chinese medicine type sphere, like there's good stuff in there, some actually really profound stuff, but it comes along with so much questionable, you know, claims that like people aren't studying it properly. So if we give, you know, there's got to be some smart PTs out there who want to do some research to isolate, you know, and do that.
That's been, I would corroborate that opinion, that experience. There's, I don't know if you guys are familiar with what some people are calling somatic sexology, or that work that is sort of bridging into the like, okay, like touch in this terrain is okay, and here is the like container and boundaries and ethics. But like you're saying, it's a terrain that's very fraught with and sort of ripe for continued exploitation, I think, in terms of the anxiety that it's freighted with. That is part of my story with it, is some trauma involved. And I have, when I think about stitching back beyond the fall on the boat and into sort of investigating and thinking about that, what are the patterned embodied stress responses? When you were talking about your inverted breathing pattern, that breath holding pattern was similar for me, and I don't really know where the origin was. I think it was largely imitative, but similarly had sort of global effects in my system that I'm starting to unpack a little bit. And similarly in that, just letting the I don't know, learning those bodied responses and how to listen to them, of like, oh yeah, like if I'm finding that my fists are starting to ball up, what does that mean? What does it mean when I am finding that I'm holding the perineum tight, and et cetera, et cetera. And the one piece that I wanted to bridge into that I think is pretty like in that sex ed terrain, and thinking about this sort of, when we bridge into that of like, what are people interested, sometimes I think about that of like, how is our body communicating to us through our arousal systems generally, in terms of like, that this activity might have some appeal. Is that because that terrain of the body wants some attention of some kind, and that's the format that we understand it to be, is like, oh well, it must be sex then because it's genitals. And that was part of the thing for me with those protocols, where it would have been helpful, I think, to have conversation with people willing to talk, was in that like, holy cow, we're talking about an area that is split between autonomic nervous system and not, and like how to navigate that. It's a real, and I think just the reminder that like, the body is both like super intelligent, and like sometimes can be really unpredictable, especially if you've learned those long patterns. Like, to unlearn, I think when I think about the like inverted breath pattern, I also think about, I used to be a pretty habitual mouth breather, and it was something that, like, people made fun of me for, and it wasn't until I was like 26, 27 in a yoga class, and a teacher was like, maybe try using like the you can sort of make a valve with your tongue and like figure it out that way. I was like, oh wow, I just never have thought of it. And it really was a incredibly impactful thing. But like, holy cow, what a difference to meet that behavior with a suggestion than making fun of it, right? And so like, when you get, I don't know, it's a funny thing. Like, there's a lot of, I guess it just, especially in this zone where it is so sensitive, like physically sensitive and socially sensitive.
I mean, and maybe that pelvic region is like a gauge on how taut your nervous system is, like, that's what we're experiencing is like, the more that you decrease that intensity, the less that area seems to respond. It could go ways as well, kind of you work on it from top down and bottom up, and it could just be an area that presents more sensitive to that.
I think you hit on something really interesting, both of you, but Rufus, of course, in that one section where everyone we look at the breathing, right, and in the groin region, let's say that. These are the two things that people don't want to look at because it's ineffectual, it's too boring kind of thing. It's in like the training mind, but it's also, and I think of when you talked about like the genital region, because people used to and say that breathing is the only thing that is conscious and unconscious. But if we step back a little bit, like, I'm pretty sure like the genital region is also has that similar vibe. So if we're saying that breathing is special in that way, it makes logical sense then to look at that pelvic region to also be, perhaps maybe when society is ready to go to it, but could also be that thing to look at to guide us as to, like you said, Kyle, to really see like where we're at.
Yep, I'd agree.
One earlier in the conversation, I was thinking about like, what is a gentle entry into this, a little like a sideline into it, and one that's been kicking around in my brain for a little while is I think I don't know if you guys know Liana Fink, the cartoonist, who's sometimes anyway, she was making a lot of fun of manspreading on the subway. a while back, and I can understand, like, I understand the like annoyance of someone taking up 2 seats, but why I say gentle entry is like, why, if we are sitting in that way, or if someone is sitting in that way, what might they be after physiologically? And I know for myself, at the same time that I had that fall, I started to address some serious weakness in the whole hip systems that, or I didn't think of it as weakness at the time, but just like, or coordination or whatever. But as I started to, that back and forth of like directly working with this system, whether it's a genital system or a digestive system or respiratory system, but then also paying attention to the overall body effects when we're talking about that, like the range of what you might be working if you're working those systems. I'm in the beginning of the fishing season now, starting my losing battle of trying to keep weight on. And as that's going on, the whole, like when you were talking about like the pelvic system being somewhere to read that overall tension in the nervous system, as I start to become more skeletal, I definitely start to feel those connections much further afield. So like I'm feeling the end, something going on in my pinky where it's connecting in my back. And likewise, like I'm feeling, and this is the like bridging into the more personal piece, but it's like, I don't know if it's protocol or not, but if at some point in the post work day, I'm offering a significant downward pull to my testicles, I'm finding release through the whole lower back in a way that's like, I don't know where this bridges into, but it's like, it's kind of, I don't care about what are we trying to do. It's getting, it's having an effect. It's having a desired effect. And that's the like, that's where I wish there was more conversational resource to like, what are you trying? What's working? Zainab was definitely useful in that terrain.
And you can't really, end this conversation without talking about gut disruption as well.
Yeah. Yes.
I think that a lot of people have severe enough GI problems that it sort of numbs them to that region, because how are you going to feel sensitized in that region if you are uncomfortable and having bad bowel movements and pain and all sorts of things that are very common? What sort of exploration are you going to do when you have chronic GI upset? I think that's an important component when maybe working with somebody on, say somebody wants to explore this stuff, right? Almost the first step is making sure they can actually feel to begin with, and if they have chronic GI issues, it's not going to be easy. So,
it's, I've been wondering about that as well, as in the past 2 seasons with fishing, because of the nature of the asymmetry of the work, I notice a lot of tightness coming up through the right psoas. And I've been curious about it. Sort of, I can predict that later in the season there is a significant GI disruption that's like both because the system is really taxed from exposure generally and like trying to keep up on calories generally. But then also I wonder about the actual like mechanical muscular influence there when we're going in the same spot. And similarly, the like not really wanting to touch lower abdomen, it's been an interesting exploration in offering like trigger point to under the ribs generally and trying to access through the through the abdomen there. That's been some of the breathing pattern has helped me understand just the like how much on the front line I've been, both again because of the work but also because of just habit and posture, starting to learn that I can actually balance when I release that front a little bit more. I have to be mindful of time. I do have to be done by 3:00. So
and I think this is probably a good place to kind of wrap it up. But bringing around to like, it's all connected, and what are you looking at? And on the third question for this piece, what are you willing to look at, right? To try to figure out these things. So I think in general, this conversation, it's been helpful to me, just being a part of it. So hopefully as it reaches others, people will also start to consider these questions. Did you guys have any final points or any last things you wanted to put out there?
There's one resource that I would urge everybody who's interested in this topic to at least look at, to try to find some empirical direction. And it's, you know, the people who wrote Anatomy Trains?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so there's another book called Recognizing and Treating Breathing Disorders,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very in-depth look to different types of breath dysfunction and how to assess and correct for various forms of pattern dysfunction. So it's a very interesting book, and I think that it takes an interesting view on the different types of effects that it could have, from your blood chemistry to posture to anxiety. It sort of looks into the questions, so it'd be a good jumping point if you're interested.
Cool. That's the Thomas Myers, that Anatomy Train world.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll make sure I put that in like the notes at the bottom of the video so people have that resource. Been a pleasure, guys. Thank you as always. I appreciate your willingness, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. I look forward to reading your articles. Thank you, Chris, once again.
Bye, guys.
Take care. Bye.